All right, so I'm on the beginning of chapter 3, so I'm on page 99 of the book. Again, I am envisioning that this particular chapter is not going to take long because last week, if you remember, we did 2 GUI or graphical user interface programs as a class. And that's what this chapter is on. So I'm going to hit the high points, but like I said, my guess is this won't take any more than until 9:30. When we get done, we will go over the review at the end of the chapter, and then I'll have to go and print out for everybody a copy of the test review sheet, and we'll go over that. All right. We've done 1 program already at the end of this chapter. That was that inches to centimeter GUI. We will do 1 more. All right. And then I will assign a few from the end of the chapter. That's what we're doing today. Tomorrow, we will go over chapter 4. Again, we will do a couple programs that are in the chapter, do it the same kind of way we did it today. Wednesday, when you come in here, you will have your written test on chapter 3, then we will go over chapter 5. If we can get all that done and keep that up, then all of Thursday and all of Friday will be lab. All right, hopefully everybody remembers, you've heard this already. No class 1 week from today. It's Martin Luther King Day. There are no classes held. So your next hands-on test will be a week from tomorrow, meaning the 22nd. Any questions on any of that? I'll try to remind you again as we go on. So chapter 3, starting on page 99, using GUI or graphical user interface objects and the Visual Studio IDE. IDE is also an acronym. It stands for Integrated Development Environment. So what should we be able to do at the end of this? Create a form, use the toolbox to add buttons and other controls such as labels and text boxes to a form, name our controls correctly, correct errors that we come up with in the program, and decide which interface to use. When you take the next test, what I will say is you can do, there'll probably be 2 problems again, and you can do them either as, what I'll probably say is you have to do at least one as a GUI app. If you want to do the other one as a console app, you'll be able to. All right. So again, much of the information that's in here is stuff we've talked about. They mention here the environment the user sees is the program's interface. I've given you examples of this before where I brought up a calculator. And what's the interface? It's what you see. It's what you interact with. That's as opposed to the implementation. And that's the code that makes it so if you put in a number and hit square root or whatever, it gives you your answer. All right. So, again, starting in this chapter, forms. A form they define here as a rectangular GUI object that provides an interface for collecting, displaying, and delivering information. I actually think, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's one of the questions on the test. They say what is an object for collecting, displaying, and delivering information? So the answer would be a form. All right. Again, in order to create a form, we're changing, instead of saying, going into new and saying project, and choosing a console app, we will now be choosing a Windows Form app. All right. Once you create it, you're going to see this. You don't have to memorize what each one of these things are. All right. And again, it's done a little, it's showing here a little bit differently. So this is when you create the project. So it'll be a Visual C#, and as far as I know, you'll always be choosing Windows Forms App.net. Don't choose the one that'll say on it, like Core or whatever. You want the .net one. All right. Now, as far as the other stuff on here, we've talked about this before. That's the name you're giving to the project. By default, the name and the solution will be the same. They don't have to be. All right. This is where you want to save it. And when you look in here, all right, because we have to start that soon, getting into working with Visual Studio and using source control. We're going to do that very soon, hopefully this week. So they explain here what everything is. By and large, once you set up the location, it usually remembers it, but you should always look to make sure it's saving it where you want it to be saved. When you get all that done, you press OK, and boom. All right. Then it brings up what you see on here. Again, as far as some of the, I know for a fact that some of the test questions, one says, where's the menu bar? Well, it's horizontally on the top of the screen, right? Another one says, what's the form designer? Or what's that thing called where you actually put your controls? It's called the form designer. All right. Remember where the Solution Explorer is, and right below it is the Properties window. In a couple days, tomorrow or Wednesday, whenever, when we start actually creating a Git repository, then what you're going to see is not only will you have a Solution Explorer, you'll have what's called a Team Explorer. You will use that for your stuff working with Git, etc. Not going to hit that now. These are your properties. This is your Properties window. The Properties window always highlights whatever the property is or whatever control is currently has the focus. All right. Your errors are shown down here. That's pretty much what they explain right there. All right. And again, I don't want to sit there and read this. Hopefully now you're getting to where you're starting to get a comfort zone. I mean, if you haven't created more than one or so GUI projects, it'll take a while. But after a while, I'll just say, okay, everybody, we're going to create a new GUI app named this. And you'll just do it. All right. So here's some of the things that you may change. For instance, on the form, you already know how to change that accept button. You already know how to change that cancel button. We've done both those. You know how to change the background color for the form. Although I haven't changed the foreground color, which is the text color, I've kept it as black, you could change the fore color. All right, we've already gone in and changed the name of the form. You may or may not have realized this, but if I've got my project up here, all right, and if I click on the form, you'll notice if I look over here, it's got a size. It says the size of my form is 582 by 317. But if I change that to 444 by 222 and hit enter, you can immediately see how it changes. So if you want to, you can change properties here. When you change properties that are changed in the properties window, you immediately see the change reflected on your screen. There are some properties that are not on here. The form itself, here's another test question. It says how many properties does the form itself show, and it's around 100. All right. But there's other ones that you can set that aren't shown here. You have to set them in code. And I want you to realize, too, this isn't on a test, but just so you hear this. What I'm in right now is literally referred to, I'm in design mode. All right. If I come in here and I run the program, now I'm in run mode. All right. But if I come in here, and I've already put code in here, but if I were to put something bad in here and I click calculate, again, I've already put code in there to handle this. But if I didn't and the program blew up, then I'm in debugging mode. Those are the three modes that you can be in. Design mode, all right, and that's where you add information to the program. Run mode, like I am now, where you're actually running the program. And debug mode, all right, when you've got an error up on the screen. Some of the other things that you can set here, we've set the name. I just showed you the size. I showed you the text. In fact, if we look on here, that says Jeff Scott Chapter 2, page 130, exercise 1. That's the text for the form. Visible. You can set anything you want on a form or the form itself to be invisible once the program starts running. Now, what I'm going to show you, there's a word for this. The word is stupid, but I can do it anyway. So if I click on this form right here, if I click on it, and I go down to the property, I don't even know if it, I guess it doesn't have a visible, but I'll go to this button. I'll just go to my exit button. All right, and there's a visible property. It's set to true. I'm going to set it to false. It still shows on the screen, but notice when I run my program now, that button doesn't show. It's still there, but it's not visible. All right, you can do that as a developer. You can go in and you can take different things on your program and make them visible and invisible as the program's running. All right, I think I made it, set it back to the way it was. Okay. As it says, some of the properties in the properties window have a plus sign noted next to them. What that means is if you click it, you'll get more. What does that mean? Well, as an example, if I click here, right there, and I go over to font, there's a plus sign. Notice I can set stuff individually there. Bold, italic, etc. If I know what it is I want to set, I can just click on the ellipsis here, and I can change it. So, for example, bold 12 point, boom, you can see how that changed. All right, it's actually now too big for the area that I've got holding it, but if I go back and change it from 12, hopefully if I change it to 10, still a little bit too big. So you get the idea. All right. Name should always be at the top. I didn't mention this before. I have a little, but not really. If you look over here up on the screen here, in your properties window, you see you have 4 things. 1, 2, 3, 4. The first one says, show me all the properties by category. So it takes like stuff and puts it together. Categorization. The next one says, give me them alphabetically. The next one says properties. Usually it's just about the same thing as putting it in alphabetic. And that fourth one shows you the different code things. Now you know this, I'm not going to do it, but with my button here, if I went and remove this, that would remove the code. All right, in that window. I don't want to do that. I'm going to go back here to alphabetic. Am I right in assuming everybody knows I showed you 3 different ways to add a control that everybody gets that? Is that a fair assumption? All right. Again, you can double click on the control, you can hold down on the left mouse button and drag it out, or you can make one and do copy and paste. Remember with your toolbox, if you click the little pin there, they call it a push pin. It pins it so that it stays on the screen. If you don't want it there, then don't do it. And again, they explain how you can drag stuff. Hopefully what you've also seen, if I go back to my program here, if I highlight all of this and I right mouse click and I choose that lock controls again, if I wanted to now, I can drag that out to make it wider. Okay. You'll notice it's now 101 by 35, where the other ones are 75 by 35. So I can go in there and manually change it like that. All right, or I can go on in and drag. any way I want to do it. It's up to me. And you also know that if I do a Control A to highlight everything, right mouse click and choose lock controls, now they're all locked. So I can't move them. Right? And that's what they're showing you in here. We already talked about these buttons we talked about these controls for forms, but they're virtually the same thing, except you've got a font on here, but everything else is just about the same, if not the same. And they work the same way. How do you add functionality to a button? You double click it, right? But as I mentioned to you in class, what you should always be doing is you should first create the control, then rename the control, then double click on the control to add the code. I probably have mentioned it, but on the off chance I have not, notice, everybody see where the cursor is? If I hit my F2 function key, maybe I have to be in here, I don't know. If I hit F2, it's always, well, it's supposed to open up the code window. Otherwise, you can right mouse click on it. Oh, it's F7, sorry. So if I hit the F7 key, it shows me my code window. All right. I can also right mouse click and choose view code. Either one will work just fine. Right. Now, this we haven't really talked about, but just so you see it, notice there it says button 1 _ click. The button 1, that's always the name of your button. All right. This is what's referred to as event-driven programming. The event that's going to happen here is a click. Clicking what? That button. So again, as you've already seen, if I double-click any of my buttons in here, it doesn't matter which one, let's grab the calculate. What does it bring up? Brings up the click event for that button. All right, button calculate. That's the name of it, _ click. Sender is basically you. It's whoever clicked it or how it happened. These are any events. And as I mentioned the other day, that with some controls, all right, you will want to use those events. Things like where you're positioned on the screen. So if you want more than I just gave you for the button, it's right here on page 108. Then next it says you've got Maine. Maine says static, where everything else is not static. All right? Static means two things. First, it means there's only one of them, and it's shared by the entire program. The second thing, as it says, it doesn't need an object to execute. Main just automatically executes when you run the program. But you may have seen this before, you may not have. All right? When we start writing code here, we're using the form1.cs. We're not using that program.cs anymore. But if I do click on it, lo and behold, look what's there, main. All right, and that's just telling it to start running the program. You may or may not remember this, but when I gave you the code for your exit button, we said that if you said you wanted to exit the program, you said application.exit. Well, notice this one. Application.enable visual styles, application.set compatible text rendering, default application.run, which says start the program. Don't monkey with those in here. All right? I don't think there's really anything in here that we haven't talked about at one time or another. Notice the author has a video creating a functional button if you still have questions. All right. Unlike unlike using buttons, labels are there to show you descriptive information. In fact, one of the things we're going to build later this week, and I guess I went a little too nuts with it, but just to show you what we're going to do later this week. I don't know if it's either tomorrow or the next day. I don't remember. I went a little nuts with the interface, and I wanted to be able to show you some stuff. So I'm going to give all of you half of this program. In other words, I'm going to give you the interface. And where are we? So we're going to write the old rock, paper, scissors game as a class. But like I said, after a while I went too nuts with the interface. So I'm going to give you this and then explain it to you when we get to that point. You don't have this right now. But there's the interface. I've added images here. I literally went out to Google and grabbed images for rock, for paper, and for scissors. Those are actually buttons. So notice that if we click this and we start to play the game, maybe you think the interface is ugly, you can always change it. It comes up and it automatically shows you the rules, and then boom, it starts to run. So notice it's me against the computer. I pick, I pick, I pick, I pick. It's just me that picks. And if this was truly random, it wouldn't be 3, 8, and 1. It would be 4, 4, and 4. All right? Sometimes you'll run it and one will win more than others. It just works out that way. But we're going to do that later on in the week. So you'll notice that that's got a lot of labels in it. It also has a lot of text boxes in it. So whereas labels are designed to show you basically headings, a text box is designed for you to be able to input data or output data. If you've got a text box with the read-only set to true, then all it does is output data. Again, you'll be working with both of those a lot. So there's the label, there's the text box. You'll be using the same type of code that we used when we were working with console apps. The only difference is that when we start to do that in here, we won't be using read line and write line because they don't make any sense here. All right. To run the program, as I mentioned, typically when you want to run it, you will click that button right there. There's other things you can do. There's build, there's test, and a few other things. 99 times or more out of 100, you'll just want to click that green arrow. All right. I told you design time. I told you about run time. The focus, what does the focus mean? Can somebody tell me, what does it mean to have the focus? When a control has the focus, what does that mean? That's where the cursor is. You cannot set the focus to a label. You can set the focus to a button, you can set the focus to a text box, and there's other controls that we'll talk about later that you can set the focus to. Yes? Can you disable the text box? Yes, you can get the focus to go to a disabled text box, but it can't do anything. So really the difference between a text box with read-only and a label is that a text box with read-only can get the focus. But other than that, there's really not much difference. Except you could always change it from read-only, you could change it from true to false. They also talk about the tab order in here. Hopefully you all remember this. I showed you, this was a pain in the butt to set the tab order. Why? Because notice if I go to view, tab order, there's a lot of things in here that can potentially have the focus. All right. And I don't even remember, it looks like I didn't even set it in here, so I'll set it now. Again, the order in which you do these is arbitrary. It's up to you. And once you've set, you go back to do another view tab order, and boom, now it's been set. All right. Formatting data, again, we've talked about this. Now you might say, well, that isn't fair because, you know, you gave us that on a test. Yeah, but that's talking using that percents or the curly braces. I showed you how to use the C, and that's all you had to do. You can do that forever now if you want to do it that way. You don't ever have to do it this way. The way that they showed it, and this is the last way I showed it to you when we went over the test. But if that way is, if you find that confusing, then the key is don't ever use it. All right, there's nothing wrong with doing it the other way. But if you want to do it this way, that's explained on page 113. I guess page 113. To change a label's font, I've already shown you how you can change the font. If you look up on the screen here, you'll notice that when I bring this up, for example, right here, you'll notice that it's got a sans serif font by default. You don't like that. If I come in here and notice if I change it to, I don't know, an Arial font, for example, and click OK, you can immediately see the change. I would say don't spend a lot of your time playing with fonts. Find one you like. Either use the sans serif, which is the default, or find one you like and stick with that one. One thing I don't want you to do, if you look up on the screen here, please, because it isn't funny, I don't want you to come in here and put in like one of those fonts. Please don't do that. All right. No, it's not funny. And no, it doesn't look nice. If you decide when you are putting your own stuff out there, when you do your portfolios at the end of the semester, and you want that, then go for it. But for stuff you hand in for me, you know, don't make it hard for me to read. And they talk about different types of fonts. That's fine. Naming for controls, again, I don't care if you say like arithmetic form or form arithmetic, you know, but you should come up with some kind of a standard and stick to that standard. All right. I use the name of the control first, followed by whatever it is I want to call it. All right. If you look up on the screen, this is important, all right? If you look up on the screen, they talk about code refactoring. It says that's basically usually what code refactoring is when you set up code refactoring, what you're telling the system is, I want to change the name of a control, and I want to make sure the IDE goes in and changes it to that new name everywhere it's used in the program. So as it says, from the rename menu, you click rename. Sometimes it'll come in there and it'll ask you this. Virtually always, you'll want to check all these. All right, you'll want to rename everything. It just makes sense to do that. All right. Correcting errors, you make a mistake. Again, if you look up on the screen, 99 times plus out of 100, it says, do you want to continue and run the last? Click no. Then in your error window, which is down here, it'll show you the errors. All right, you can go in and you can also double click on any of the errors that are shown in the error window. It'll jump you right to that point in your program then, automatically. Deleting an unwanted menu, we've already done this. All right, how you go in there and you find it in your properties window and remove it. All right, so there's nothing new there. It says failing to close a form before attempting to re-execute a program. I don't know if this is what they mean, but please look up on the screen because this is going to happen to all of you. It's no big thing, but I come in here and I run the program. All right, Yeah, I put in 56. Yeah, it looks like it works. But I keep the program up for whatever reason. All right, now I go back to my program. All right, sometimes you'll be able to do that and jump back to your program. It looks like I can't here. But if you can, you're going to try to hit something, and a dialog is going to come up that says your program's still running. If that happens, just click right here on the kind of maroon square, and boom, you're not running anymore. Visual Studio Help, you may or may not be aware of this, but let's say that I wanted to learn more about buttons than I know. I can click on the button to make it active, and I can hit my F1 function key. It brings up the online help, and notice what it's on, right on the button class. So if you want help about anything special, you can highlight it and hit F1. You can also go out to msdn.microsoft.com that we've talked about before and do that as well. Deciding which interface to use, the author says GUI apps look snazzier, and quite often console apps look dull, but they're easier for beginning programmers to understand. All right. I would say that if you wanted to put a console app into your portfolio at the end of the semester, go for it. But I would suggest that the majority of the ones that you put in there should be GUI apps. They just look nicer. All right. Then there's a you do it, and I think this brings us to the end of the chapter. It does. All right. A lot of key terms in this chapter. And if you would please, let's go look at the review questions. So I am on page 127. So we will do this right now as a class. And again,